his own solo movie. Well, not really, but we are talking Pollen, and this is directed and written by D.W. Medoff. Now, despite this kind of looking like it's going to be a creature feature, it's actually a psychological horror movie. And it focuses on this young woman called Hera, and she's kind of in her first job, which appears to be some type of kind of sales office, and she's very kind of wet behind the ears, very naive, but she's very enthusiastic about her job and seems to be having a, you know, a fairly good start. But it all starts to unravel when her kind of boss, this kind of cocky sales manager type, sort of takes an interest, and ultimately he just wants another kind of notch on his bedpost. He seems to be the sort of the type that kind of one of these guys who wants to sleep with all these kind of female employees, and he sort of seduces her, giving her this kind of like potted plant, and ultimately kind of forcing himself on her. And then from there, she's kind of obviously disturbed by the situation, but kind of gets into some sort of like obsession with him, and then he ultimately kind of rejects her. Now he's kind of had what he wants, you know, he is no longer interested, and ultimately kind of tries to make her look like a fool. And this really sends Hera down on this kind of dark path, and she starts to kind of have visions of this kind of Groot-looking kind of plant man that seems to be tormenting her. And really this is a metaphor for, you know, loneliness, trauma, and kind of obsession and rejection. So what all happened, you will have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about what I think works in this film. I have to say, obviously, these are quite heavy themes, and I think the you know, the message here of how an act can kind of really kind of derail someone's life and kind of send them on a dark spiral for that purely selfish reason, like in the case of this Zach character, who's this sales manager, just getting his leg over, and how much it can affect someone, you know, really does kind of quite hit home. And that kind of, this movie does a good job, I think, of showing you that, and the psychological damage that something like that can do to someone. So I do feel the movie does have, you know, its themes of kind of psychological damage, and especially on someone who's so naive and sort of like a deer in headlights kind of type person, and how much that can affect them. That does a good job of, I think, demonstrating that. And I have to say, I think this is helped by the fact that there's some decent performances. I don't think it's Oscar-worthy exactly, but I think the performances are good. The actress who plays Hera, I think, does a good job of making her seem like very kind of like naive, innocent, and easily taken advantage of. And I think that is done well in her performance, and how she, you know, is coping or not coping with the kind of the situation, and how she ends up kind of obsessing about this kind of plant, which she then kind of you know, has these kind of visions of this kind of tree man and things like that, and how ultimately it kind of sends her on a kind of downward spiral. So this is a movie very much about kind of mental strain and kind of buckling under the kind of the pressure that other people kind of put you on, the trauma, and how people either deal with it or not deal with it, and ultimately how someone's selfless actions can have such a kind of large ramifications on someone. So there's some interesting things here, coupled with some fairly good acting. Now, I think this was an interesting set of subject matter if it were a short. And this leads me to maybe what doesn't work. I feel the concept here would have worked in a 15-20 minute short. But for a feature-length movie, I feel there's not much else going on in this film. I mean, we get a couple of scenes here with her sister and stuff, and there's a prologue with some girl committing suicide, but it's never referred to again. But I'm assuming this is like, I don't know, just showing you that what ultimately could happen in these kind of situations. But there's not. I feel the movie, it just is a little longer than it needs to be. It's not a long movie in fact, but it just feels like the concept is stretched out longer than it needed to be. So I think this movie could have worked as a short, 20 minutes, but for a feature length, it ultimately becomes a little dull, and a little kind of feel like you're kind of treading the same ground over and over again. There's just not enough to it to a degree. So there is that. I mentioned, I think for the majority of part, the acting's fairly kind of solid, But I do think there are a couple of performances, well, minor characters who I don't think are kind of quite as strong. I think sometimes the character of Hera, I mean, she acts a little bit too much like a kind of a deer in headlights. I feel her, you know, they've made the kind of the point here of showing you how kind of like, you know, naive and wet behind the ears she is. But I feel like it works to a point. But it becomes an issue. I think the film sort of tries to, you kind of end up losing sympathy for her to a certain degree, because you just feel like she is not helping herself at any point in this film, and I think that is, you end up losing sympathy for her because of that. So overall, I think this movie has an interesting concept. I think, you know, it performs quite well. But I don't think it really needed this tree man, if I'm honest. I mean, it just seems massively superfluous, and it just seemed to have to be there to have like something sort of fantastical on the poster. But you could have had this kind of story without the tree man, really. It doesn't really serve any real purpose. You could just, you know, end up unraveling and us not having a tree man. But it's just like, oh yeah, we need something like more fantastical to kind of make it look more like a kind of horror film. Well, I think it was a bit surreptitious, if I'm completely honest. To me, it's, you know, a good exploration of a damaged psyche, but I don't think it really excels in any particular way. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. It's maybe a little bit kind of like on the dull side for some, and I think it could have had more impact had it been an actual short and maybe an anthology or something like that. So it's a 5 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.